Hello and welcome to Cold Red, True Crime on Red Alert. I'm Bianca Crespo, producer at Santa Mira Studio, and I'm joined by James R. Fitzgerald, an American criminal profiler, forensic linguist, and author. He's a retired FBI agent best known for the capture and conviction of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. I am also joined by Raymond J. Carr, criminal profiler, teacher, author, and retired FBI agent who is most known for his capture of the most prolific bank robber in history. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Bianca. Hi.
Hi, Bianca.
Hello. Hi. As we emerge from the tragic past week involving the shooting in Nashville, I just wanted to discuss the case involving the manifesto, and it doesn't seem to be in the public yet, since the FBI does need some time to go over and evaluate what they have. But I just wanted to know, either of you can take this. What can you both tell us about the personality of a murderer who leaves behind this kind of manifesto?
Well, I was on Laura Ingram's show twice last week discussing just this particular topic, along with the shooter and the tragic situation itself. And again, our thoughts and prayers to the victims and their families, and also a pat on the back to the police officers who did a great job on that scene. Yeah, but in terms of manifesto itself, and that word gets thrown around a lot, even the Unabomber never used that word. It's the media who gave his tome, his missive, if you will, the term manifesto. He just called it his article that he wanted published. And I made it clear, speaking in the media earlier this week, that the Unabomber's manifesto was one thing. He was still alive. He put it out there. And it was then that we used it as an investigative tool to try to determine who this pseudonymous person was. He signed it off as FC. So, I was one of the first proponents to argue with some FBI agents and supervisors to let's get this thing out there. It's going to be a key way of identifying its author, who was also a serial bomber. So again, with the Nashville matter, I don't know if the shooter called it a manifesto or not. Certainly writings. This would not be released as an investigative tool per se, but more as a glimpse into the window of the soul, of the mind of this notorious killer. There's a lot of information in there that I think the public has a right to know. We see signs everywhere. See something, say something. Okay. Ray and I are investigators. We're behavioralists. Forensic linguists. We've worked this for 20, 30 more years than that, going on 40, quite frankly, for probably both of us. And we have kind of the inside track here, but the general public may not. So we need someone's writings, and we need what's in there to better tell us how certain groups of people are thinking, and they should be released to the public.
When I look at this, and you talked about the personality of the offender, I don't see any difference in this offender that I would see in the offender of Virginia Tech, the shooter there, or the shooter in Vegas. Virginia Tech left by and actually sent information to radio stations. The offender in Las Vegas, although he didn't send things any place on his computer, there was a load of information and notes that were readily made available to law enforcement. So why do they leave this stuff behind? It's been my experience that one of the reasons they do is because they want people to know what their thought process is. They know going into the shooting itself that they're very certain that they're probably not going to survive. So with that said, I want to make sure that I leave something behind where people are going to remember me. And the more detail and the more grotesque detail I have in these writings, or as you call it, manifesto, the more people are going to remember me. And that's what I want. I want people to remember who I am, or maybe there's a cause. We talked previously about what causes someone to do this. And it's usually starts out as a grievance. We talked last week where we said it doesn't happen in a vacuum, but it starts out as a grievance. Then they come up with an ideation or an idea of how they're going to go about it. And one of the things when they're doing it, they're saying, how are people going to know what I was thinking or what I was going through? And that's what the notes in the manifesto are kind of for. There's always a mental health component to this. And I've heard through news media and other people saying, this is not a mental health issue, this is a gun issue. And I couldn't disagree more. I'm not saying it's not about guns, but I'm saying it's also about mental illness. That's definitely a factor in this because what this person did is not normal behavior. It's outside the realm of behavior that is considered normal by most people.
Most of these cases involve the suicidal individuals. They have some sort of end game with that. But at the same time, as you spoke of, it's almost like they still want to be immortal. Like, even though they will die, they feel like they will live on in some other fashion. Could you perhaps explain the psychology behind that?
Well, let me start here real quick historically, and I'll kick it over to Ray in a minute. But
Sure.
the Unabomber, I think people were accusing him back in the day of being a nutcase and, possible mental health issues. And before he wrote anything. So as a reminder, the first 15 years of the Unabomber's career, he's putting bombs out there. He's seriously injuring people, also killing at least one in 1986. And then injuring others subsequent to that. And then he went dark for 6 years. But during that 6 year time period, he decided to start writing once he came back. And he wanted people to know that he had a reason for doing these killings. He had an ideology. He had some sort of philosophy. So I think a lot of these people, and we'll say the Nashville shooter may, in their own little way, fit into this category. It's not just the act itself of killing a bunch of people, including 9-year-old kids. It still hurts to even say that. But it's not just the act of that itself, which will give them the infamy that perhaps they seek, but they have to let the world know that they're doing this for a purpose. They're not completely, dysfunctional and have come unhinged and unwired, whatever euphemism you want to use here, but they have a purpose. There's a meaning behind what they do. And that's where this manifesto comes from. And that's what I said a little while ago. The public has a right to know this. See something, say something. Okay, tell us what to see. And this manifesto could shed a lot of information into what future people may see. This is not just about understanding this person better. That's a big clue. And people saying, aha, that's why he and, she or they did this particular act. Let's look at these types of writings. Let's look at this mindset because it probably belongs to other people out there. It may be shared across a subculture of people of which we don't have all that much information yet. And to put that out there for the general public to learn and to learn from could make a big difference in stopping the next mass shooting that may be something similar to this.
When you look here and kind of piggybacking on what Jim said, the manifesto is going to tell us the type of criminal shooter or extremists we were actually facing. And when we talk about, there's numerous different types of those types of shooters. One could be a disgruntled current or past employee or student. You could have domestic violence involved, which I don't think that's here. You could have domestic terrorism, such as in Timothy McVeigh. You could have international terrorism, such as the shooting in San Bernardino. You could have anti-government, which was the shooting at the Washington Navy Yard. You could have religious or racial hate crimes, which there's a potential here because there's been some mention of Christian, but I don't really know if that's appropriate. There could be revenge here, retribution. There could be some depression. There's a thing called suicide by cop. And when these individuals go in and they're going in and they're looking to actually commit suicide, but they don't have the guts to take the gun and kill themselves. So what they say is, I don't have the guts to kill myself. So what I'll do is I'll use law enforcement to help me do that. So I'll create a situation and I'll go out with a boom and maybe do that type of mass shooting. That's a possibility here. But the biggest, and research has shown, the biggest subset of all these type of criminal shooters and extremists is those people that are emotionally disturbed.
I want to get the terminology correct as well. We have these active shooters, we have mass murders, we have mass shooters, massacres. You mentioned extremists. What are the, I guess, proper terms for each, dependent on the situation?
We'll say Ray wrote a dissertation regarding these topics. Why don't you run with that, Ray?
Sure. First of all, when you think the definition of an active shooter, it's easily one or more individuals that are actively engaged in killing people in a confined area. So you say, well, what is a confined area? The confined area is determined by the shooter themselves. But here's the thing. The first active shooter situation that's on record happened in Bath, Michigan in 1927. But they didn't call it an active shooter back then. They called it mass murder. So what is mass murder? Mass murder is basically the killing of 4 or more people at one time in one location. But when you look at mass murder or mass shootings, if you were to ask the media how many mass shootings were there in 2022, there's 620 or 630 mass shootings. That's not really good information. That information is skewed because they're not following the definition that was put out by the FBI, letting them know exactly what the situation is. And then people get in and they say a mass murderer or an active shooter. That active shooter terminology was coined by the media because it sensationalizes the incident. But when you think about it, there are many other instances that occur that don't involve a gun. So really what the terminology really should be, and what's kind of coming out, but it just hasn't been picked up by the media yet, is active assailants. And when you look at active assailants, they really break them down into 4 categories. You look at violence by strangers, violence by customers or clients, violence by coworkers, or violence by relating a personal relationship. One of those 4 topics there. So you look at it and you think, well, when I'm talking active assailant, I'm talking someone that's coming at you with a knife. They could come at you with an axe. They could come at you with a baseball bat. They could come at you with a car. They could walk in strapped with a bomb. But if they're killing 4 more people in one location, that'll really tell you whether it was a mass murderer, because that's the definition of a mass murderer. So when you look at all these things and you put them here, and then people say, well, we don't really have it. And when you look at a lot of the incidences, and I had a chance to do that, as I said, I wonder how many instances the media is putting out that occurred in 2022. 2023, there's well over 100 already. and I looked at some of them, and most of them are one person, 2 people. So are they more robberies or assaults or ag assaults than they are mass shootings? That's the question. So a lot of the information that's going out to the public is really misinformation, which I'm not shocked by the way. And it's because they just don't understand. The media doesn't understand. And they're not responsible for a lot of the things they're putting out. They're just trying to get the information out. Doesn't matter whether it's correct or not.
And do you believe that the media has been responsible for a lot of the, I suppose, assumptions that have been created after these incidents occur, in terms of just little details? I mean, is there a certain level of protocol that you believe the media and should have in response to whenever this kind of incident occurs?
I tell you, the media lacks patience. They have none. Talk about the manifesto. They think it should be out already. Why don't we have it? We were able to have everything else. They put out the camera footage. They showed us the weapons, but they won't show us the manifesto. Well, that's really not important right now. It's important to us because we want to know what's there, but for law enforcement, they're still dissecting it. and they're having a lot of different people reading it based upon, and Jim, you can jump in here. I'm going to throw it over to you in a minute. But based upon these things, when they get into law enforcement or they get down in the behavioral science unit, they take their time in putting this stuff out. They go through it and they go through it and they go through it to make sure that before they put out something that describes this individual, that it's going to be accurate, it's going to be correct, because it's going to be dissected by everybody. So they want to make sure they're true to it. Am I on target with that, Jim?
Yeah, except I think the media in this particular case, it's interesting. The manifestos, we'll stick with that term for now, that they want to see published, and then there's manifestos they don't want to see published.
Yeah.
And you think the media and journalists would always be up for transparency and putting stuff out there. I'm old enough to remember the Pentagon Papers. Ray, I think it was your old FBI office that was broken into the night of the Ali Frazier fight, before both of us were in the FBI, of course, in the Newtown, was it Newtown Square FBI office, Ray?
Yes, that's correct.
And of course, the media, New York Times, Washington Post couldn't wait to get those documents out. I get it. It's a whole different, there was a Vietnam War thing back then. But other documents over the years, the media really want out there. But in the last 10 or so years, you see it sometimes based on a particular narrative. When I was on with Laura the other night, she played a few clips of people. I couldn't see the screen because I was a guest on the show. And she played them from some other network. And here was two senior FBI agents, retired, who were saying, oh, the manifesto is probably all gibberish and there's nothing going to be any valuable for the public. I said, who are these FBI agents, or who are these people? I said, if they're journalists and they're not clamoring to see what's there and they don't want to release, what's up with them? We as the public, and Ray and I are in the public now, like everyone else who's not sworn law enforcement actually working this case, we have a right to know what's going on here. And I wish the media would be a little more proactive and a little more insistent and most clearly consistent is the key word here in these types of items and what mass shootings or mass killings they cover, what they don't. It seems like sometimes demographics plays a role in that. And that's not right either. No matter what the particular race, ethnicity, sexual inclinations of an individual is who is the mass murderer by whatever means, that shouldn't make any difference. As same with the race, ethnicity, color, sexual inclination of the victims. The story should be reported accordingly and consistently. But unfortunately, that's sort of a rare event nowadays.
It truly is. And it's sad that that is the case now, where news outlets tend to just grab whatever they can, essentially like piranhas, and spew out as much as they can in a short amount of time, speculating and just making sensationalized stories. And it's hard to find actual investigative journalism nowadays, as we all know, or ones that have patience to, respect the victims and the law enforcement behind this incident, who is trying to do their best job to essentially find out as much as they can about what occurred. I think
And Bianca, if I may add here, that's why we decided
Yes.
to do Cold Red. We're not
Yeah.
journalists, at least Ray and I are not, but we don't pretend to be, but we are purveyors of information, factual,
Correct.
objective information based on our multiple decades. What's the total, Ray? Maybe 80 years between us?
Oh, you got 60 of those, Jim.
Okay,
You have
close
60
enough.
of those, bud.
But the point is, we want to get this information out there. And sure, we have some opinions in here, but that's based on these multiple decades of experience under our belt and the
Correct.
real time investigations we work. And not that much has changed over the years. Technology, of course, is different than since I've retired in terms of instantaneous, tweets and social media type stuff that
Correct.
these people put out there. But other than that, criminals kind of kill for the same reasons. The same core elements are involved, but it's deciphering those and how they manifest and how they can better be identified by law enforcement, of course, to begin with, but the public also, family and friends and coworkers and fellow students, that perhaps is what we need right now. We need transparency, not opaqueness, in terms of this kind of information.
Precisely. I think it is a matter of self-defense and preventing future victims, future crimes. The more information, the better. And that being said, I feel like that brings me to the topic of where these shootings tend to occur in these, typically, at least from what we've discussed with Nashville. And I mean, there were cases in Columbine and Sandy Hook that occurred in schools. I'm just curious in terms of what your individual experiences shown and taught you both. Why schools? Why are they the target? Just because they're easy targets, less security? What's the purpose here
I
from what
could
you've
tell you,
seen?
I could tell you right off the bat, it's because it's a target-rich environment. What I mean is, there's a lot of people in a small place. You know, let's take a look at Nashville. I mean, that's what we're here to talk about. And Jim, I'll throw this out to you and tell me if I'm missing any points here. When you look at characteristics that are typical of these types of instances, they're usually spontaneous and they're unpredictable. Although in almost every single situation, there's going to be pre-incident signs of behavior, and there was in this as well. When there is a response, it's going to be multi-jurisdictional. The incidents occur in a target-rich environment. The individual, the offender, has no escape plan. 9 out of 10 of these are usually going to result in suicide, or the shooter is suicidal. So then let's look at characteristics of a typical shooter or offender in these type of incidences. And this is based on research I've done, but usually there's a mental incapacity, or they're acting in a diminished mental capacity. Mass murder is often the goal rather than some sort of other crime, such as robbery. Most of these instances are over within 5 minutes. This one took 14. In these instances, there's multiple weapons and ammunition that are often involved. You can expect a lot of chaos, carnage, confusion, frightened people, people running and hiding, people unwilling to respond to direction, and these type of things. And usually when a traditional police response doesn't work, it usually takes a tactical intervention that's needed, such as alert, which is what you saw in the tape that was released. Exactly what those officers were doing. They're calling the alert. When they go in, they either go in groups of 3 or groups of 5. And you heard them call out right at the beginning of the tape, give me 3, give me 3. And that's typical alert training. And that's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah, let me add to that. The location of these particular mass shootings is of course, obviously chosen by the offender. Sometimes we have multiple locations. The and even multiple ways of killing. The Scandinavian killer, I believe Norwegian, started with a bombing in downtown Oslo, then went to an island of mostly all kids, young teenagers, and I think he killed a few people with his car bomb, and then 80 people on this island. So 2 different forms of killing there in at least 2 different locations. I think this Nashville killer had another school or church lined up that they were going to shoot up, but fortunately, they never had a chance to egress the Christian school at which they were. I'm going to take this to a little bit of a different level. We talked, and I think Ray explained very well locations. What best works for them. They're not going to go necessarily to a highly guarded or secure situation. They'll go the path of least resistance, like water going downhill. Of course, their target acquisition, the attendant victims will play a role in this too. And now we know, of course, this shooter went to this school years ago. And there's also reports that, I'm not sure this has been confirmed, but I've read a few reports that she was actively looking for the pastor of the school, who was associated with this school, under which she had some therapy sessions. She went in the school that day looking for him, couldn't find him, and decided to track down his 9-year-old daughter, and then murdered her, along with 2 other little kids and, of course, staff members of the school. But until this manifesto is released and we have some indications, I teach threat assessment at Penn West University, and from a forensic linguistic perspective, but there's other tie-ins to that. And I always borrow for my students an article written by some friends of mine, Reed Malloy, Chris Mohandy, a guy named Noel, and a guy named Hoffman. I forget their first names, but I know Reed and Chris pretty well. And it's called Identification Concept and Threat Assessment. And I think it's very interesting how they broke these types of killers down into 5 different categories. And as you're going to hear, I'm going to go through these quickly. Um, um, our shooter in Nashville meets 3 of them right up front. And we have to wait until the manifesto comes out or other information about whether the other 2 match up. So how do these people identify themselves? And more importantly, if you're a coworker, a family member, a friend, and this person had some of those, of course, these are factors that should have been looked for. Number 1, in terms of their overall persona and how they see them, this is all about how the person sees themselves, how they think. They consider themselves pseudo commandos, and that is they assume the appearance and behavior and desire of commandos and desire for revenge and obliteration. And if you looked at the initial surveillance photo from the school from Nashville, you see the person wearing camo pants, these cut off sort of tactical looking gloves, and of course the weapons, the backward cap, and the vest where they can carry extra ammo, magazines, who knows what else. So this person really had this pseudo commando persona clearly developed just in the dress and attire, if nothing else. The other thing is a warrior mentality, and that is motivated by psychological fantasy to kill unarmed civilians. Okay, well, that's clearly what happened on that particular day. They also have a close and often secret association with practical and symbolic weapons and paraphernalia. We can talk about in a lot of different ways with different type mass killers. But if you saw the close-up pictures of the weapons once they were confiscated, they had little designs on them, little nicknames, little cutesy stickers of some sort. Okay, once again falls into this secret association with these symbols that mean something to the offender, in this case the shooter, even if it's not clear to anyone else. The shooter seeks to be like or even surpass other historical or contemporary shooters, mass shooters. They could be of the fictional or non-fictional variety, but somehow they want to get those numbers up there and perhaps beat the last guy. And lastly is these shooters will see themselves as an agent or a soldier to advance a belief system or cause. So was this person anti-something as an anti-Christian? Were they pro-something in terms of pro-trans? We don't know that specifically yet, but as out of these 5, what we do know, pseudo-commander, warrior mentality, the secret association with symbolic information, we'll see whether somewhere it's written that they wanted to beat out the last mass shooter, or in fact, if they are a soldier or an agent of cause, for whatever issue may be there. But I think my colleagues in the psychological community who penned this article back in 2015 really hit the nail on the head. And it's stuff, Ray, you and I knew in the FBI when we were doing this work as profilers, but I think they really synthesized it well, giving specific characteristics. And you could look at almost any mass shooter out there, probably throw in incel 2, involuntary celibacy. We'll see how that plays into this person. I'm holding off on that sort of issue for now with this shooter. But you can see, Ray, and I think you would agree, most mass shooters have several of these features, if not all of them.
Absolutely, Jim. I couldn't agree more. Let me add a little bit more to that. In my research for my dissertation, what I looked at is I looked a little bit like you did, like Reed talked about and Chris talked about, but I looked at motives, why they were doing it. Why would someone want to do something like this? And I came up with 6 areas. Number 1 was extreme anger. Number 2 was they had a fear or a perception of being persecuted. Number 3 was the fact that they were paranoid or had a paranoid ideation of what was going on. They were usually depressed. They were usually antisocial or narcissistic. And one, which we don't know about, but we'll probably find out about, there usually was a major loss related to employment or relationship or something that's kind of occurred. Usually they would have 3 or 4 of these. Most of the shooters that I came across in my research had all of them, along with some of the things that you mentioned as well. So there's a lot going on here in the backgrounds of these people. But what I also found out is that in a lot of this, people always think these active shooters, they're all by themselves. They're loners, they're introverts. And I find that so far-fetched that it's not true. As a matter of fact, research has shown that in 81% of all these active shooters, mass murder situations, 81%, at least one other person knew. And in almost 60%, 59%, 2 or more people knew. So it's amazing that people know, but they're not doing anything about it. And my question is, why aren't we doing something about this? We're complaining about guns. We're complaining about this. We're complaining about law enforcement. We're complaining about all these things when everything rides with us. We see it, and you keep saying it, Jim, see something, say something. We see it, but we ignore it. We can't do that. We need to take control. Can't depend upon the government. Right? Most of the times the government's the problem.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, we touched upon this in our last talk, our last discussion regarding accountability and understanding that there are many things that are out of your hands, but with things that are within your control, you should act and you should speak and you should say something. Even if it's something that you feel as though could be nothing, could be, oh, he's just a little sad or he's this or that. I feel like it's important. It's something now that we've had so many of these horrific events, and now with all the information coming out and how you two have spoken various times regarding the breakdown of these characteristics of these individuals, there are preventative measures. So that brings me to our moment of silence. But before we even get to that, I encourage all of our listeners to stay tuned afterward to listen in as you both, Ray and Fitz, provide our, I suppose we can call it our cold red PSA regarding any kind of insight you two can speak of in terms of how we can prevent future crimes from happening. So I hope that you all tune in after our little moment of silence for these victims of violent crimes in order to educate yourselves regarding any kind of preventative measures regarding that. So please, Ray and Fitz, join me for a very brief moment of silence. Thank you. Now I throw the mic over to you both regarding what we can do, we meaning the general public, people who feel like they can't do much. Are there specific, for instance, self-defense classes that pertain to these kinds of scenarios regarding these active shooters? Any kind of situation regarding that? Are there steps to take in order to become less of a victim?
Yeah, I think our goal here is to keep these relatively short. And I just want to stress here, I mean, we're on the topic of mass shooters. Maybe this is my law enforcement background. Whenever I go into a restaurant or a bar, conceivably, I like my back to the wall. That's an old habit of mine. But it also holds me up if I've drank too much after a while. That's a joke. I hardly drink at all anymore. Anyway, but you want to. But when I walk into a building, I want to know where my exits are. I want to know where windows are, and I do look around and say, is there anybody kind of sitting by themselves? And we know a lot of these violent people have, they're in some sort of relationship. But most of these crimes, Columbine was an exception. I was going to say most of these crimes are conducted by solo individuals, one person. There's rare exception in that regard. Do some people, we find out later, know about things? Yes, but they're carried out by one person. So is someone acting kind of odd, fidgety? Do they not seem to fit in? And just do a visual scan. Keep an eye on that person, perhaps. Maybe report something to the owner, but certainly have a way of getting out. Or quick cover. Do you turn over a table if something goes bad and hide behind it? And there's all kinds of tactics. the best thing to do is run from an active shooter, then get cover, but just don't throw up in a ball. And if you can fight back, throw something. I always tell people a fire extinguisher is a pretty good weapon. First of all, if someone is even walking around with a gun, if there's one near you, take it and pull the little pin out and just squirt it at the person. And you can really disorient them. And if it runs out and you have nothing left, then use it to hit them over the head and hurt them. There's no guarantee you're going to make it out alive, but you may give yourself and others a chance. So that's my little bit of advice to prevent yourself from being a victim, in this case, of a violent crime. We'll have other less, property crime advice we give down the line here. But with today's topic, I think this one is appropriate as far as I'm concerned.
All very good.
Okay, let me kind of jump in here and kind of talk about how do we stop this threat of these shootings from occurring. And I'm going to give you a 4-prong approach here. And doing any one of these things is going to help you. Number one, you need to develop the knowledge to recognize behavior pre-indicators. Jim kind of alluded to that for prevention. You need to do that. There's plenty of information out there that you can look at. Number two, you got to develop and raise your situational awareness. Okay. And Jim talked about that when he goes into the bar, sitting with his back to the wall, and looking for the exits. You need to strengthen or increase target hardening efforts. So, for instance, if you work at a building, you're looking at the security personnel. You're looking at the design of the building. You're looking at technology, and you're looking at what the policies and procedures are. And the last thing is developing the skill and mental mindset that Jim alluded to when he talked at the end to survive an incident, which is kind of the run, hide, fight. And the thing here that Jim said that I think is very, very important, if you hide, don't hide under a desk where you're going to wind up becoming the victim and instead of the assailant, instead of being the person that's fighting for it, because you put yourself in a position where you can't fight. So the whole thing here is to make sure that if you can't run, all right, and you're going to hide in a position that if you're found, you're going to be in a position to fight. And there's plenty of information and videos out there to kind of show you how to do that as well.
That's great. I think it's important to have these tools. Heaven forbid something were to happen. I remember just going to St. Basil's in Jenkintown in high school, and we would have these kinds of drills, I guess we called it back in the day, regarding any kind of, not just fire drills, but if there was an active shooter situation, they'd lock the doors of our classrooms, and we'd have to go into the corners so the shooter wouldn't see us in the windows of the actual door. And I remember thinking, well, what if they shoot through the door, and they just walk in? What are we going to do? Granted, it makes me think of the psychology behind, all these young high school girls sort of crouched in the corner away from the window. Of course, we essentially could overtake this shooter because there's more of us than there is of them, but they have a weapon. In that kind of situation, what would you two recommend that, for instance, a young girl like myself back in the day, what would we do?
Well, every situation has to be weighed separately, and there should be drills for this at the school. Right. And by the way, to our listeners in Tokyo, London, Mumbai, and Cape Town, Jenkintown is in suburban Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States. Just to get that part clear.
Thank you.
So we're not just localized to one area here. We know we're going worldwide with Cold Red. So every situation has to be weighed accordingly, and you're right, not with a crowd mentality attacking the one bad person, the one threat. Ultimately, that person can be overtaken, but perhaps even carrying thick books or some type of a desk, if someone could pick it up to help, maybe protect the person from being shot, some sort of a shield, but some sort of disorientation. But every situation, we don't want to get into a situation here where we're explaining in very much specific detail how to handle these types of situations. It depends on the geography, the environment. I was going to say more than one or more than one person. That's almost always one person. But of course, their weaponry. If you do see a time when a person is changing magazines or changing weapons, it may just be a few seconds, but that's a time when an attack or an escape would be the time, would be the occasion to do it. So all these things have to be taken into mind, split-second decisions, but just sitting in embryonic, curled up ball in the corner is not the way to go out. Go out with some kind of a fight or a charging effect to at least disorient the person. Hopefully you'll make it, but if not, others will then make it out some other means of egress.
Well,
Correct. I think, yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Bianca. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just, off of that, I think excellent points there regarding that. And I was just going to ask regarding specific, do you two know of any kind of self-defense classes? I believe, if I am correct, you both taught a few classes regarding with active shooter situations and protocol and training for that.
There's classes all around. Of course, I mean, you should always be working out. You should always be in the gym, do some sort of exercise that's going to keep you. But here's the thing, is that the physicality of this, we get caught up in the physicality of it. That's about 25%, if not less. The mental mindset is really what's important here. If a situation occurs and you're in a room with a bunch of other kids in school or at work, and you're thinking, oh, darn, something's about to happen, it's too late. It's too late. I'm going to tell you right now, it's too late. You need to think about this prior to. It's kind of like when you think about a fight, it's always good to think about what you're going to do before the fight begins, than just to think about what you're going to do once the fight comes. Because once the fight comes, it's too late. You're in the fight. So my thought process here is replace the if something happens when something happens. And the psychological aspect of that kind of puts you in a position where now you're replacing that. And I think I might have mentioned this last time we talked, but you have about 3/4 of a second to make a decision here. And the decision, either you're going to be a victim or you're going to be a survivor. And the longer it takes you to make that decision, the more of a chance you're going to become a victim. So you've got to have that mental mindset, that mental capacity. You've got to know before you go in, every time you go in, and you have to take into account, do I have children with me? Do I have elderly parents with me? Who is with me that's going to slow me down, or can I speed up? And you're always thinking about these things, and it could be very taxing to you when you're trying to think about it in the moment. That's why it's important to run over the scenario over and over and over again. I tell people when I do active shooter training, I tell them that when you're at work and you get a little bit of downtime, instead of searching the internet for the next thing you're going to buy online, think about what you'll do in a situation should something happen. And then act it out. Nobody knows you're doing it, but you do. And then what you're doing is you're putting that mental mindset in place that if something happens, now you're not saying, what am I going to do? You're going to be reacting to it. And that's what you want to do. You want to react so you don't have to think about it. And the only way to do that is through training. Think about all the athletes. If they never trained, they would stink, right? So they train every single day. So you don't have to think about what they're doing. They just do it automatically. And that's what makes them so good.
That's very true. It's a good point to bring up, comparing it to athletes and how they are professional athletes and they know the steps they need to take in order to play a great game. And they have plays in mind. They have all these different moves in mind. They prepare their body for it. They prepare their mind. They get amped up for what they can, control and what they cannot control. And I think that's perfect in describing this kind of, scenario where it's always best to be prepared because we don't know what's going to happen. You step outside your front door, someone could, walk behind you and, pull out a knife. You don't know. You walk into your car, same thing. It can happen anywhere, as we spoke about before, and it's best to be alert and present and understand that you're not truly safe. I will say it again, you're not safe. But in order to take, proper precautionary measures in order to prevent these kinds of situations, I think it's very important. And I believe that's all the time we have today, gentlemen. If you have no other closing thoughts, I think I'll close out, but I give the floor to you for now. Before I do you have anything else you'd like to say to our listeners?
I'll just sum up this section of saying pre-planning equals potential survival. That's the only formula you really need to live by.
I'm going to follow up on Jim. Prevention or preparation prevents failure.
Perfect. Perfectly said, gentlemen. Thank you once again for coming on board Cold Red to discuss another very interesting topic that we hope to educate and enlighten our listeners in order to prevent future victims and future crimes. Once again, I'm Bianca Crespo, signing off with James R. Fitzgerald and Raymond J. Carr. Thank you for joining us for Cold Red. Until next time, stay present and stay alert.